So this is verse 28, and it's translated as, "But he who knows the true character of the two distinctions of the soul from the modes of nature and their works, O mighty armed Arjuna, understanding that it is the modes which are acting on the modes, does not get attached." So this is how to view the world and which perspective that we should be using. This continues on from the last verse and explains that we should incorporate this principle into our life, and if we do so, then we'll have no reason to ever be sad. Everything that's happening in the world is because the modes are acting on the modes. Now, once we recognize this, firstly to describe what the modes are, we need to sort of understand what departments they are. And again, as I said earlier, we should look at these in terms of the qualities and the different aspects that there are in the world. So if we divide this, A is the three modes of goodness, passion, and dullness. That's goodness, passion, and dullness. B is the five elements, which is earth, fire, water, wind, and space. So that's earth, fire, water, wind, and space. The next one is the mind, intellect, and the ego. So that's part C. The mind, intellect, and the ego. D is the five senses of knowledge, the eyes, the nostrils, the ears, the tongue, and the skin. E is the five senses of action, the hands, the feet, speech, the reproductive organs, and the excretion organs. F is the five objects, words, touch, sight, taste, and smell, so our senses. Okay. Now, when all of these things come together, the scriptures call these the departments of the modes. And, these arise when different modes come into contact with with each other. And it says in our scriptures that all the actions that are created are because of the effects of the modes on the modes. So the principles are that the modes of one body join together. They can either, there's two options. They can either join together or they can conflict. If they are the same, they'll join together, and if they're different, they'll conflict. So whether the actions are good or bad, it depends on whether the modes are acting or, conflicting. Basically, there's an example here of ghee. So the ghee has the quality of being sticky and being able to burn easily and lightening up things. So when you make the qualities of ghee join together, so that's cotton and butter or ghee, and then a little cup, you get a match which allows things to burn easily, and you put all these things together and you get light. Now, when you do these things, all these qualities help each other, and you get that. As a result, you get light from the lamp. And this is actually the action of lighting a lamp. But what did we actually do? We put these three objects together, we use their qualities, we arrange them in the correct way, and we get something that we like, which is light. So if, on the other hand, we take qualities that are not matching, for example, water, and pour it over the lamp, this will put out the fire. Now, until now, you got all the qualities that you liked, so everything was working in harmony, the match, the key, and the cup, and you got something that was the right consequence, you got light. But the quality of water is conflicting with these qualities, and so if you pour that over the key, then the light will finish. So Guruji says that everyone should start looking at everything that's happening in the world from this angle. So the angle that we should be looking at it is everything has a quality. So don't necessarily look at a person, but look at the qualities that they have. Whatever happens, a person should therefore try to become an onlooker. Therefore, a thing can never become something that you like or dislike. Because something that, a thing that someone likes is something that is compatible with his qualities, and a thing that someone dislikes is something that is incompatible with his qualities. So say, for example, when we were young, we had our qualities come and go, and they change all the time, so they never last and they keep changing. When we were children, we thought it was fun to marry dolls or to play with little race cars, and this is something that we enjoyed. Now, when that same person, for example, becomes 50, and someone tells him, why don't you marry two little dolls in your dollhouse, they're probably not going to enjoy it so much. You might enjoy playing with the little mini race cars still, but probably it's unlikely. So when someone was 18, for example, he didn't let chocolates go because he loved them. When he turned 45 and he had diabetes and the doctor said, you mustn't have any sugar, now having chocolate is actually incompatible with his qualities. So, Guruji says, well, when is the person right? Is it when he was 18 and he ran after chocolate, or when he was 45 and he ran away from chocolate? Spiritual knowledge will tell him that he's right because he is the soul, and it was his qualities that liked or disliked the chocolate. When he was 18, then his quality was to actually run towards the chocolate. And when he was 45, his quality was to run away from chocolate. Guna guneshu vartanta, so it refers us back to the verse again. It's the modes acting on the modes. Therefore, there's no happiness in running after the chocolate when he was 18, and no sadness in running away from the chocolate when he was 45. Any situation that comes into a person's life, you should see it in terms of the qualities, and therefore you'd be free from the happiness and miseries of life, and that's the perspective that we should use. So, to illustrate this sort of concept, Guruji's given us an example of a Zen saint called Rinjay. Now, this particular saint was passing through a town, and 10 out of 10 people would recognise him. 9 out of 10 people would pay him respect, recognise him and admire him, but 1 out of the 10 people would be against him and disliked him. So obviously it's natural that in life not everyone will agree with what we say, and some people might not follow what we say or believe in our teachings. But that's not something that should affect us. One such person who disagreed with this Zen saint came along. So Rinjay, the saint, was walking down the market, and this particular person came from behind him and hit him on the head with a stick. So he did that, and then he started running away. So lots and lots of people saw this. So 9 out of 10 people admired and respected this particular saint, and they all got really annoyed and said, we've got to go and catch him really quickly because I can't believe he's just done this. And then Rinjay said, look, stop, no one needs to go anywhere, you don't need to run after this guy. And there was a particular shopkeeper that was really in admiration of Rinjay, and he turned really red and annoyed and said, why should we not punish this person who's hit you? And Rinjay said that he was passing through a jungle a month ago, and a branch of a tree broke and he hit and fell on his head, but he did nothing. So the shopkeeper was confused and didn't really understand and said, I don't really understand what you're trying to say. What is it that you're trying to say? So Rinjay explained, look, if you can't understand it from this example, I'll give you another example. When I came into this town, I crossed a river, and before I came into this town, and at the time my boatman was very hot-tempered and angry, and ever so slightly when a boat bumped into this boat, the boatman wouldn't stop swearing at the other boatman. When we came to the bank of the river, we docked the boat, and at that time there were lots and lots of other boats as well, and they were docked nearby. But when the boat was docked, other boats were unmanned, and they came and knocked and slightly touched the boat as well. But at that time, the boatman did nothing. He didn't seem to swear or get angry. So Rinjay told him calmly that when we were in the middle of the river and a manned boat touched him, why would he swear so much? He'd swear at the boatman and be angry. But now when he was docking his boat and the other boats were touching him, he didn't say anything. So he was questioning and saying, look, does that mean that it was the other boatman's fault that the boats collided? When the unmanned boats touched his boat, then he didn't say anything because he admitted that it was the flow of the river, so a natural cause that caused the boats to collide. But when the unmanned boat touched his boat, he got angry because he thought, he didn't seem to get angry because of that. When Rinjay was passing through the jungle and the branch fell on his head, he did nothing to the tree, because once again this was the force of nature, something naturally happening. And Rinjay understood that it was the branch of the tree, and therefore it must have gone old, and therefore it was his natural inherent quality to fall. This was just a person, and it was the same thing to him as if a tree branch falls on his head, or if someone hits him on the head with a stick. Why should I run after him just because he's a human? So again, it's the modes acting on the modes. Guna guneshu vartanta. That person was a human, and his qualities, not the human, made him strike Rinjay with a stick. So when anything happens to you in life, try to look at it in terms of the qualities, not the person. So don't hate the person, think about the qualities of that person that's making them act in that particular way. There's another example that Guruji gives us, and it's from one of his elders. There was a saint standing near a river, and there was a scorpion that kept coming out and coming onto shore. So Guruji saw that the scorpion was slightly drowning, so he picked it up. Not Guruji, sorry, one of Guruji, the person in the story, picked up the scorpion and put it back into the shore, but the scorpion bit him on the finger. So then he had to let go, but the scorpion was still there, and he had to lift it up again, and he kept picking it up, and each time he picked it up, he got bitten on the finger. He did this several times, and the scorpion kept biting him. So a random man walking past saw him and said, why are you doing this? It was a saint. He kept on asking him, why do you keep picking this scorpion up every time when it's biting you? Isn't this hurting you? And the saint said, I do this because it's the scorpion's quality to bite, but it's my inherent quality to save it from drowning. So the scorpion was showing its quality, and the saint was showing his own quality. Again, guna guneshu vartanta. So this is the modes acting on the modes, the inherent qualities. Whatever's happening in our existence, whether it's a good or a bad thing, it's the modes of nature acting on the modes. So now we might question, why is it that Sri Krishna is so detached from what's happening? Because if you go back into context, Arjun's on the battlefield here, Sri Krishna's talking to him, and, there's potential war happening. So why is it that Sri Krishna's not, he's detached from this? Sorry, not detached, he's non-attached to this. Sri Krishna's sort of able to see that, for example, when there are two waves in the ocean, when the first wave comes and the second wave comes, they collide and a bigger wave is created, and they're going in opposite directions from one another, and there's friction. But it doesn't really make a difference to the sea which way the waves are going, whether they collide and they lose their strength, or whether they one goes higher than the other. The sea still maintains a complete calm. It makes absolutely no difference to the sea. And in the same way, Sri Krishna's mind is like is looking at the armies of the Pandavas and the Kauravas, which are like two colliding waves in the sea of existence. So Duryodhan is the summit of the wave of the Kauravas, and Arjun is the summit of the wave of the Pandavas. Both of them are at the top of their waves. Sri Krishna is watching all of this with non-attachment. Guna guneshu vartanta, because he knows that it's the inherent qualities and nature that's acting on the modes. So Duryodhan is from the Kauravas and Arjun from the Pandavas. Great personalities don't leave their compassion, because this is actually their quality, this is their inherent quality. They look at everything with, an indifferent nature. And if we try to understand this through the spiritual knowledge and the Vedantas say that when a person begins to view contact between his senses and the outside world as modes acting on modes, then he has a sense of a witness. So I'll say that again. When a person begins to view contact between his senses and the outside world as modes acting on the modes, then he has a sense of witness. Whenever this sense of a witness arises in him, then he has no bondage to his karmas. So if we look at the example of a father with 3 children, the father has a big business and he trains his children from a young age to handle the business. The children complete their studies, and when they're older, they begin running this family business. After around 10 years, the father sort of reaches the age of 70, and the father sees that the children are handling the business very well and that they've settled. They're fully trained and the father has no worries whatsoever. Once this happens, the father starts slowly withdrawing himself from the business and letting his children completely take over. So when they sign contracts, when they conduct, all the business matters and the financial matters. And he oversees from the top, as a witness would do, that the business is going well and that he doesn't need to go in every single day. In this same way, if we use this analogy, the father is like the soul and the children are like the senses. The father is the soul that gives training to his children, that are the senses, about the business of life. So when the senses are properly trained and the soul knows that the knowledge senses and action senses are doing the right work all the time, then the soul starts to become like a witness. He lets the senses perform action, and he has now no bondages to his karmas. The soul knows that the senses are acting. As long as the body is there, then the senses will continue to work, just in the same way as the children are there and they will continue to work and uphold the family business. The soul doesn't get pulled into this and that, and therefore it doesn't fall into bondage. Until the senses are properly trained like the children, the soul will fall into bondage. If one has sons but the sons do not look after the business, then the father himself will then have to go in and, he won't get any freedom. He'll have to continue to manage the business. So therefore, when we train our senses properly, we can let them take over our, the business, and only then will we become free. After this, there will be nothing that gives him sorrow. So this is actually, there's an example that I'm now going to discuss, which is from Buddha's life, which is really beautiful, which for me illustrated the point very clearly, because up till this point, I wasn't really understanding how the modes were acting along the modes. But this, to me, explains it really well. In Buddha's life, there was a beautiful event, and he used to see everything that happens in the world as modes acting on the modes. So in the outside world, he viewed this, as the key concept. And if something good happened to him, he'd accept it. And if something bad happened to him, then he also accepted it. He didn't have any complaints in his life. So one of Buddha's rules were that the moment he woke up, the first person that would go to him to say, would you please be a guest at my house and have dinner here, that first person that gave him the invitation, Buddha would go there. So he would say yes to the first person and say no to the second person, because there'd always be a line of people queuing at Buddha's house. He never did bookings or tell someone, I'll come back the next day and I'll come, later. He would always accept the first person that came there and gave him an invitation. So, if Buddha had like a booking system, he would go on for years and years, and he'd just constantly be eating at people's houses. But if someone didn't come first and then came later, Buddha would just say, look, I've already accepted an invitation from somebody else, but please do come back tomorrow. So on one particular day, it happened that there was a blacksmith called Chand who came in early in the morning, and he gave Buddha an invitation and said, please come to eat at my house. And Buddha agreed because he was the first person that had come into Buddha's house that day, and to make the invitation. So Chand, this particular blacksmith, was extremely happy because Buddha came into his house, and Buddha said yes. Very soon after Chand had left Buddha's house, a big businessman had come into Buddha's house and said, please come to eat here. But Buddha said, no, I've already accepted invitation, so you must try and come tomorrow. The big businessman got upset and left. And then the time came to eat at Chand the blacksmith's house. And this was in the area of Bihar, because this is where Buddha would have spent the majority of his time. In fact, this is just a tangent, but the name of the region Bihar actually comes from Buddha creating establishments called vihars. And vihar meant an ashram of Buddha. Bihar is another way of saying Vihar in the local dialect, because they actually use B instead of V. For example, they call Vraj by Braj. So this region was at the time was a beautiful area, and wherever you would go, you'd see Buddha's establishments, and it was also Mahavir's, the Jain god, Mahavir's region, and that's why you saw a lot of people that were peaceful and meditative, and in fact people still go there now to find the trees. Basically, that whole province was named Bihar. But Guruji says that now it's the province of the Lalus because it's completely destroyed. But anyway, we'll leave that for now because that's just a tangent. So anyway, Buddha went to eat at Chand the blacksmith's house. And the people who were, there was a lot of poverty at the time. And this particular blacksmith was very poor. And therefore, he couldn't really do very much. He couldn't really make a 5-course banquet for him. But it was a tradition then, and it's actually still a tradition, to make mushroom and spinach. Because these mushrooms grow sort of all over the place. And they grow underground, and people go and find these mushrooms. They pick them, they collect them, they dry them, they leave them for a year. And then when guests come to their house, they make this chapatis with spinach and onions. So they just eat the mushrooms with chapatis and onions, but when the guests come to their house, they make mushroom with spinach. So these mushrooms can sometimes be poisonous, as everyone knows. Some versions of, some types of mushrooms can be poisonous. They all might look the same from the outside, but inside, once you eat them, they might be poisonous. But it's only once you eat them that you realise that they're actually poisonous or bad for you. Now, obviously, if Buddha's coming to their house, they couldn't give him the poisonous ones without testing. So they tested them, and then they prepared this mushroom spinach with a lot of love. Now, when Buddha came, Chand the blacksmith gave him this food with as much love and compassion as he possibly could. And when Buddha put the first mushroom in his mouth, it tasted really bitter, so straight away he realised that this was a poisonous mushroom. So Buddha looked into Chand the blacksmith's eyes, and Chand had tears of love because he was so happy that such a great saint was coming to his house to eat. So Buddha thought that if he then told him, look, this is poisonous, he would get very sad and his heart would be broken. If Buddha told Chand that, these mushrooms are poisonous, then he knew that Chand would not be able to get any replacement food because of the poverty. So he stayed quiet and he consumed and ate all of this poisonous mushroom spinach. Chand continued to serve this spinach, thinking that it was, fine and there wasn't anything wrong with it. And he kept serving it with love, as most of our parents probably do when guests come around, keep feeding until there's literally nothing left. And Buddha continued to eat it. And in this same way, he finished everything that was there. And they didn't even leave any spinach for Chand because he knew that if he did so, this would be poisonous, and therefore by eating it, he'd be poisoning Chand. So he ate all of this mushroom spinach. Now, Buddha would stay in each town that he went into for a few days. So he then just went to rest under a tree after this meal. And then at around 3 or 4 p.m. in the afternoon, Buddha started to get really sick with diarrhea and vomiting as a result of this poisonous spinach that he'd eaten. Now, it's said in the scriptures that his whole body dried up that very afternoon. And as soon as Buddha realized that he wasn't going to last any longer and that it was sunset, and basically his disciples started to gather around him, and obviously they were quite worried and they'd realized that something had happened. But Buddha told them to send one man to the town and make a big announcement that in Buddha's life there were two people who were equally important. And they were especially important to him. The first person was Buddha's mother, because she fed him for the very first time. And the second was Chand, this blacksmith, because that's where he had his last meal. So he realizes that, you know, if he said, for example, at Chand's house, I was given poisonous spinach, this person would be killed straight away. So he saved Chand from this, you know, this sad occurrence. And he gave the message there to everybody saying, give the same amount of love and respect to Chand the blacksmith as you would to Buddha's mother, because Buddha has had his last meal at Chand's house. So imagine the compassion and the love and the understanding that Buddha had that, you know, these mushrooms were poisonous, and they all, you know, brought about his death, but yet he understood that this was the quality, the inherent quality of the mushrooms, and therefore he wasn't angry at Chand, the person who was giving the mushrooms and serving with love, but the actual quality of the mushrooms that made him sick. In Buddha's mind, it was the modes that are acting on the modes. Therefore, the quality of these mushrooms were poisonous in this case, and Buddha accepted this. And, you know, and there's another thing that Buddha actually talked about, and Guruji particularly likes it, so he talks about it here, and he says, when Buddha's eyes were closing and his Mahanirvana was actually close, his consciousness was slowly going away from his body. His disciples gathered nearby, and then when the evening came, a little bit of wind started blowing around the town. So as a result of this wind, the tree underneath which Buddha was lying, flowers started to fall down. So obviously all the disciples started thinking, oh wow, this is as a result of God, because the flowers are falling down, and the gods are honouring Buddha and showering flowers on him at his last moment. And as soon as Buddha heard these words, straight away he said, no, that's not true. Gods are not showering flowers on me. It was the flowers from the tree, the natural qualities of the flowers, that they're ripe now and they're falling on me. Do not spread talks about miracles after my death. And this is Buddha. His disciples were near him, they were human, and they'd be very excited about spreading such talks about the miracle of Buddha's death. But he said at the end of his life that don't spread any talks about these miracles, because they're not showering of flowers taking place. The flowers are falling from the tree onto the body, because this is a natural consequence. And basically he did this in his last moments of his life. Buddha's disciple Anand, who's also Buddha's older brother, stayed with Buddha throughout his life, and he came to him and he asked him at that last moment that, do you have any message for me? And Buddha said a really beautiful sentence. In fact, this is my favourite part of the whole verse. And he says, Apa dipo bhava. So Apa dipo bhava. And this actually means you become your own light. So in the Buddhist scriptures, it's said that after saying these particular words, Apa dipo bhava, you become your own light, these were his final words to Anand. Buddha closes his eyes and he attains Mahanirvana. On the second day after this, Anand also attained enlightenment. This is because he had always stayed with such a great personality, Buddha, and therefore he'd accumulated much knowledge. He was very dependent, you know, on his guru, Buddha, and he was always with him all the time. But it's said that a true great personality never makes anyone dependent upon him. He makes him independent and gives him his own sort of own strength. So when Anand asked Buddha if he had any message for him, he said, Apadipa bhava, which means you become your own light, and therefore, you know, you become your own strength. And in this way, Anand gained Buddha's state. Again, the modes acting on the modes. So that's moving on to verse 29.